Hey students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is Aim 4, Dred Scott v. Sandford. Make sure you have your Unit 4 vocab sheet open. Look these objectives over and get ready to copy some vocab and take some notes. Dred Scott v. Sandford is the name of a Supreme Court case that was decided in 1857. It's one of the most infamous Supreme Court cases in all of U.S. history. And infamous means famous for bad reasons. The Dred Scott case is infamous for being one of the worst, most racist decisions the Supreme Court ever made. Before I give you a definition for this term, let me explain what happened in the case. Let's go back to 1854 when the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. This map shows free states where slavery was not allowed in green, and the free states are all the northern states plus California. Slave states where slavery was legal are shown in orange, and that's all the states in the South. And then there are these areas in purple, which were territories that didn't have enough white men living in them yet to apply for statehood. Remember, the Kansas-Nebraska Act said that these territories would get to vote on whether to become free or slave states, and that was called popular sovereignty. In the story of Dred Scott, there are three areas on this map that are important. Missouri, which was a slave state, Illinois, which was a free state, and Minnesota, which was a territory that, according to the Missouri Compromise of 1820, did not allow slavery. Here's a picture of Dred Scott. One thing that's fun about getting to this point in history is that photography was invented. So we finally have pictures of people and places instead of just drawings. This is a real photo of Dred Scott. Dred Scott was a slave who belonged to a man named Dr. Emerson, who lived in Missouri, which was a slave state. In 1834, Emerson moved to Illinois and took Scott with him. Illinois is a free state. And after 2 years in Illinois, Emerson moved to Minnesota, another free area, and took Scott with him again. Scott spent 2 more years as a slave in Minnesota before being sent back to Missouri. At this point, he had lived in either a free state or free territory for 4 years. Once back in Missouri, he was then sold to Emerson's brother-in-law, John Sandford. Scott now sued, claiming that because he had lived in Illinois and Minnesota, he was legally free. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at this time was a man named Roger Taney. Here's a picture of Taney. He was strongly pro-slavery. Many people expected that he would rule against Scott, but few expected that his ruling would have huge effects that went well beyond the case of this one slave. Now, let's go back to your vocab sheet and finish filling in term number 12. Taney's decision had 2 huge effects. First, it denied citizenship to all African Americans, whether slave or free. Taney argued that the Founding Fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, had never intended for black people to be considered citizens, and therefore, black people, whether slave or free, were not entitled to any of the rights of citizens of the United States. One of those rights was the right to sue someone in a court of law, and since Dred Scott was black and therefore not a citizen, Taney said that Scott had no right to even be in the court. So the case, in Taney's opinion, was null and void. Taney also said that the case was void because Congress had no right to decide whether states could allow slavery or not. In other words, according to Taney, there were no slave states and free states. There were just states. And slave owners were free to bring their slaves wherever they wanted. Of course, this infuriated Northerners, who were now being told that slavery was legal in the North too, and it made sectional tensions a lot worse. Now you can see why people call this one of the most infamous Supreme Court cases in history. Now it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, rewind the video and look again, and I will see you in class. Bye, students.